Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Naruto is Orochimaru's successor? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the NIGHTANGEL52 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Orochimaru smiled as he looked over the recovering Konoha from his perch on the Hokage monument. It had been a week since the Kyuubi attack, and his sensei was beginning to discover Orochimaru's many experiments. It was only a matter of time until he found him, so he figured that he would leave now instead of risking losing all of his precious research. He already moved all of his research findings and material to a location that he wanted to found a village in. It would be what he always wanted Konoha to be, a place where people could start anew and a place filled with knowledge. He even had a follower by the name of Kabuto. He would stay here under the pretext that his memory of serving en route was erased by the Yamanaka clan recently and was adopted by the head surgeon. Orochimaru sighed when he began to think about this. He would be all alone in his new village, and it was extremely boring experimenting on people with no one to witness it. Not many people knew this, but he really did enjoy teaching young minds. Sure, most people would find his teaching material a bit evil, but in his new village, he'd make his experiments volunteer only for shinobi and civilians. Honestly, that Tenzo kid who survived his experiments would be one of the strongest shinobi in the village because of him. Sadly, he could not carry the boy with him to his village, so he would leave him here to be found. Orochimaru shook himself out of his thoughts on the village again. Now what was he thinking about again? Oh yes, who to bring with him to his future village. Well, he did want to be immortal, he did not want to be ruler of a village all of his long eternity. He would rather travel around, learning new things as he did instead of being in one place constantly. Maybe Anko would be a good choice for his successor. No, Orochimaru changed his mind seconds after thinking idea. While Anko was sure to come with him while escaping the village, she was too kind-hearted to lead a village or even be his apprentice for that matter. She was a follower, not a leader from what Orochimaru had seen, even though she would do whatever Orochimaru told her to without question. That was unfortunate, he had put a lot of work into Anko. Oh well, he was sure he would find someone better suited. Orochimaru slowly stopped his thoughts as he looked down to the fourth Hokage's head. The smile that truly belonged to a snake more than a human grew on Orochimaru's face as a plot began forming in his head. What better way to receive a successor than to raise one from scratch? Yes, he would be exactly the right pick for the job. He had the heritage after all, and a tailed beast to boot. While Orochimaru did not show it, he was incredibly loyal and only wanted to strengthen his village. His loyalty was only broken when Sarutobi had made what he thought was the wrong choice in Hokage, therefore weakening the village and making it no longer his village. The village he created would be different, it would be the strongest, and would eventually destroy Konoha to show them what their decision had cost them. He chuckled slowly as he thought of all the villagers reacting to the sound of their village burning and their shinobi dying. Hey, that gave him an idea. The village hidden in the sound, or Itagakure, sounded like a fine name for a village, didn't it? Yes, that name would do greatly. Hiruzen sighed as he looked over a crib with a small blonde child in it. In another few weeks the boy would be taken to the orphanage and taken care of there. Although, the more the old man looked at the boy, the more he wanted to just give the boy to his son to take care of. There really was no one who could care for the boy at this time though. Jiraiya had firmly stated that he could not take care of the child on the road, and his spy network was very important to Konoha. Kakashi was still suffering from the pain of losing almost everyone, if not everyone, close to him. He still wasn't convinced Orochimaru wasn't a pedophile or experimenting on the people of Konoha. On top of all that, Tsunade had flat out refused to take care of the boy because she always traveled, and the boy looked too much like Nawaki from the picture he sent her. As Hiruzen left the boy's makeshift room in the Sarutobi clan compound, he couldn't help but think about his wayward student. He had changed ever since Hiruzen had overlooked him for position of Hokage. Orochimaru had brought up some great points of why he should rule instead of Minato, but he had always seen him as too much like Danzo. Of course, he knew that without Danzo Konoha would not be nearly as strong as it was now, but that was why Danzo needed to be there instead of Hokage. Hokages had to be people that everyone looked up to, the ones who could do no wrong and defend their people. Being like that got them more jobs after all. People like Danzo were much better suited to handle things like assassinations or conspiracies that resulted in deaths of many. Orochimaru would be great for that position, but he had his eyes set on Hokage. Hiruzen was cut off by his musings by a baby's cry and immediately went to Naruto's room. He hastily ripped off his robes to reveal his battle armor and summoned Enma before breaking down the door in a battle-ready stance. What he saw almost made him drop Enma and growl in anger. Orochimaru, I should have known it was you who would do something like this. Right in the middle of the room was Orochimaru with Naruto in one hand and the sword he had recently stolen from Kusagakure. "Why hello sensei," Orochimaru said in that mocking tone of voice he always used in battle. "I don't believe we've ever fought since our little bell test, have we?" Orochimaru blocked an overhead strike from Hiruzen and jumped back before the weight became too much. "As much as I would love to stay in chat sensei, I must be going now. Little Naruto and I will be going off to learn immortality. Until next time sensei." Orochimaru smiled before putting away his sword. Hiruzen would rather not say how and summoning 3 giant snakes to cover his retreat. "Damn you Orochimaru." Hiruzen yelled as he suddenly had to deal with tree snakes attacking his compound. He only hoped none of his family would be killed by them. Orochimaru chuckled slowly as he leapt from tree to the location he planned on building a Togakur in. He silently congratulated himself on leaving at this time instead of waiting for his sensei to find his research. Jiraiya was scheduled to come to the village in about a month and it would be messy if the two were to battle. Oh well, good planning skills do come in handy. As he began thinking about his village and how he was going to convince the feudal lord to allow him to build one, Naruto began to cry. Orochimaru sighed and began burping the young child. "It is alright little Naruto. I am going to make you the most powerful ninja on this planet and you will be the one who will make the hidden sound rise to greatness. Of course, we will need to change your name and look when we get there, wouldn't want Hunter Nins to find you after all. How does Akuma sound? Naruto was a stupid name anyway." Orochimaru saw how Akuma began to giggle at the new name. He guessed that meant he liked the name. The rest of the trip went off without a hitch and Orochimaru found that in the short time they had been traveling, he had already become attached to the brat. With a few Earth-style jutsus that had Akuma clapping his chubby hands, the beginning of a Togakur was formed. In the future, it would be thought of as a village where anyone could have a fresh start in life, where scientists could achieve their wildest dreams. Where if you didn't have a bloodline trait, you could have a new one implanted, and even if you didn't you were still thought of as valuable. It would be a place where the impossible became possible. But, that was still a large way off. Right now it was little more than a hole that needed all of Orochimaru's material moved in. However, thanks to a boy barely a week old, it would become the strongest village in history. Jiraiya sighed as he surveyed the damage of the village he loved. He had left a week ago and had just returned as quick as possible to the news that Orochimaru had left the village and had destroyed half the Sarutobi clan on his way out, as well as kidnapping Naruto Uzumaki. He had barely been able to control himself when he heard a few villagers say that the 2 demons of Konoha were gone. Unfortunately, when he returned the trail was already 3 days old. As it was hard to track Orochimaru on a 3-hour trail, a 3-day train was pretty much impossible, even for him. However, Jiraiya had already promised himself something. He would stop at nothing to find his godson and old best friend and return them both to the village. He would take care of Naruto instead of running like he did when he was born. He still thought that if he had been there to take care of him, then this wouldn't have happened. Jiraiya sighed and changed course from the bathhouse he was going to go do research on. He would go to the Hokage's office immediately this time, and nothing would stop him from finding his godson. Orochimaru sighed in his research lab in a Togakur. His village had about 100 shinobi, all from the Fuma clan, that was the major shinobi force in the land of rice paddies. He was going to wait a few years until changing the name to the Land of Sound. A crash reminded Orochimaru of a promise he had made a few months ago when Akuma learned how to crawl. He would never recruit a child below 3 years old to Odo. Sure, Akuma was a good kid, to Orochimaru at least. He was quiet, attentive, and only cried when he absolutely needed to, except when he was around anyone else. When he was around others he actively tried to be annoying. Of course, he was also curious which, while good for the future, was disastrous for a child in a laboratory. Orochimaru slowly turned around in his swivel chair to see Akuma trying to hide behind a few vials and looked down to see the DNA formula that he was trying to perfect to recreate the Rinnegan spilt on the ground. He could see why Kabuto attempted to get a restraining order from the child now. Orochimaru shrugged and went to go pick up Akuma. He figured the formula wouldn't have worked anyway. Senju DNA plus Uchiha DNA surely could not have been the key anyway. Orochimaru continued to repeat his favorite mantra of the last few years, only a little while more, as he put the baby in bed. When the kid grows to be 2.5 years old, he would finally be able to be trained. According to ninja history, it would be best to only train him in the basics until he reached age 4. That was when the chakra system more or less finished adjusting to the point to where using chakra extensively would not harm the user. After putting the child that seemed to have the goal of destroying every project in his village, Orochimaru returned to his laboratory and sat at his desk. Around him were stacks of papers about various intelligence reports and results on experiments. One of the requirements for the Fuma clan to join Odo was to give them a Kekai Genkai. He had been attempting to give them the legendary Eye Jutsu so he could possess one of their bodies in the future, of course, but someone had ruined that. Maybe that wasn't the answer anyway. Perhaps instead of recreating a bloodline, he should create his own. Since the Fuma clan was known as the best shuriken and weapon users in the world, maybe a bloodline that made them reform and form metal was the trick. Orochimaru stood up and wrote a note to remind himself to get his scientists hidden in the land of wind involved in this study. Perhaps if he altered their blood to take in elements from the air and exert them as metal, or maybe have their blood have an abnormal ability to produce more iron and exert it through sweat pores as the metal. Orochimaru-sama. A Fuma clan member muttered at the doorway to the Snake Sannin's office laboratory. She was a woman who seemed to be in her early 20s and had been chosen as Orochimaru's assistant thanks to her attentive nature and lack of murderous intent towards the terror that is Akuma. She wore the usual Odo shinobi gear, a purple vest with black pants and a wide undershirt, but did not wear the usual mask adopted by many others. She wore her green hair in a ponytail that reached her lower back and had a Fuma shuriken attached to her back. Naifu also was one of the more serious shinobi of the village and had been one of the few that refused to receive a new bloodline trait. She was a Chunin and was a censor who was actually attempting to be considered for the future Odo Jounin exams. These are exams very similar to Chunin exams, except that there were no teams and it was not open to the public. Anyone not a shinobi was banned from watching the exams to prevent spying. Also, the requirement to apply was rather hard to accomplish as you had to be Jounin level in 3 skills and complete 100 missions with at least 15 B rank. During the test, the applicants had to show off their skills, pass a test filled with things all Jounin should know, and show their mission record. Yes, Naifu, what is it? Orochimaru asked. We have 2 new recruits at the recruitment center named Misumi Tsurugi and Yoroi Akado wanting to join Sound. They want to become stronger and have signed up for the enhancement program. Orochimaru smiled at that last part. The recruitment building was at the capital of the land of rice paddies and had an option for the sign-up form new recruits received. It was different for civilians and ninja as civilians joined the academy in Odo that was recently opened and ninja went through a test to see where they will be put in the ranks. There was also an option that put them in the enhancement program where they were experimented on to give them special abilities. If they worked they were applied to multiple volunteers who would form a clan and pass on the new genetics to their offspring. That is very good news, Orochimaru said with a chuckle. And how old are these 2? 11 and respectfully. They came from Iowa after their adoptive father was murdered by a ninja right in front of them. Will their age be a problem, sir? No, not at all, Naifu. In fact, it is better to have young recruits as they have more time to adapt to the experiments and more time to get stronger. Soon, I will actually be traveling the world to pick up a few young ones to join our forces. Very well, sir. I will go get the recruits ready for experimentation now. Naifu vanished from sight and Orochimaru knew she would be at the recruit soon. He had little doubt she would be promoted to Jounin in the exams and was looking forward to seeing her participate. Now then back to his research. What should he give these recruits him? Time skip. 1 year because why not? Orochimaru smiled as he looked down in the underground arena that was built a few months ago to hold the Jounin exams. A Togakure was now fully complete and was an extremely large cavern that had steel-reinforced roofs so that nothing could go through them or collapse them. There were buildings all throughout the village and a monument like Konoha's on one wall of the cavern. The stands were about a tenth of the way filled with multiple shinobi from Odo. In the past year over 200 ninja had joined the village. While most were no-named missing nin or civilians who became genin, there were a few chunin and jounin that had joined the village as well. Speaking of which, one of the jounin was approaching him right now. Suian was a ninja from Tokigakure when Orochimaru met him and he immediately took an interest in the man. He was on a mission to investigate his village and he noticed early on that Suian wanted power. He told the man he would give him that if he joined him and helped him further strengthen his village. Suian accepted and brought about 10 more ninja form Taki with him, including one participating in the Jounin exams named Suka. Suian had long spiky hair, small dark eyes, and a goatee. His hair was a grass-like green and he wore a dark blue jacket, grey pants, black sandals, and a bandana with a sound symbol etched into the middle of it. He was about 28 years old and was one of the strongest ninja in the village after personal training from the Snake Sannin. Are you ready to begin, Odakage-sama? Suian asked as he kneeled behind his Odakage. Yes, begin the exams as soon as you are ready. The written portion and mission sheet review had already ended, so now all that was left was the 3 skills demonstration. For ninjutsu you had to demonstrate at least 10 jutsu and 2 different chakra affinities. For kinjutsu you had to fight against another jounin who was an expert in kinjutsu. For medical ninjutsu, you had to show an example of great chakra control and had to heal a heavily injured boar. The list continued on, but there was a test for everything. Also, if a person showed a skill unique to them, it counted as one of the 3 required. This was also why he selected Suian as the proctor of the exams. He was skilled in kinjutsu, ninjutsu, taijutsu, and barrier ninjutsu, and could even summon a large catfish called Kanenmaru. Very well my lord, Suyin jumped down to the arena floor below and pulled out the list of applicants. There weren't very many as the village was still new, in fact there were only 6 of them. I will not be showing all 6 of their exams. I am only doing this even to show you all what the battle system will be like, and he skillset of a few semi-important characters. First up is Suka. Will Suka please come down here? Suyin heard a yell and a cry of how dare you pervert and sighed as Suka came towards him. If he passed, Suka would be the youngest jounin here at 16 years old, that is if his womanizing habits didn't get him killed beforehand. Did you piss off now Suka? Suyin asked almost bored. Some chick named Naifu, I swear it was an accident. I didn't really mean to grab her down there Suka said while rubbing the back of his head. Suka had a head of long green hair that reached his shoulders in length. He also had black eyes with green eyebrows. He wore a sleeveless black shirt, a pair of grey pants and a blue and orange jacket. No matter how many times he told him to get rid of the awful color, Suka just wouldn't budge on the matter. I'm sure. Now what 3 skills will you be showing off today? Suyin asked with the patience of a man who's known Suka for a while. Summoning jutsu is a special skill, ninjutsu and taijutsu. Very well, let's start with your summoning jutsu. Remember to try and not use a lot of chakra as the ninjutsu portion is next. Suka nodded his head before biting his thumb and slamming his palm to the ground. After the smoke from the technique cleared the audience of shinobi gasped as they saw a waist-high black and red spider glaring at Suyin. Orochimaru meanwhile was leaning forward in his seat as he saw this. Summoning contracts were rare, for one of their ninja to have one was extremely valuable to the village. Very good, Suka. Now unsummon him so we can start the ninjutsu portion. Suka nodded again and unsummoned the spider. You will have to prove that you can use 2 chakra affinities and use 10 ninjutsu. The fall down here didn't make you forget how to do them right. Suka scowled and began making hand signs. Showing him do each jutsu is boring, so I will not do that. In the end he made 7 fire-style jutsus and 3 earth-style jutsus, including Fireball Jutsu, Mud Wall Jutsu, Mud Dragon Jutsu, Fire Dragon Jutsu, Mud Bomb Jutsu, Fire Vortex Jutsu, Smokescreen Jutsu, Fire Spit Jutsu, Flamethrower Jutsu, and finally Flame Bomb Jutsu. In the end the arena was covered in smoke and scorch marks. Suyin had never been more glad that Orochimaru installed ventilation seals in the roof of the village. That smoke smell would have never gotten out otherwise. In fact, the village might as well have been outside with all of the special seals like the air currents and light seals. Okay cough, finally is the taijutsu test cough, Suyin said while trying to cough out the smoke he inhaled. To pass this, you and I will engage in a taijutsu spar. If I deem you strong enough to pass or you defeat me, then you will become a jounin. Prepare yourself. As he said this Suyin dropped into a taijutsu stance as well as Suka. Without further warning, the two launched themselves at each other as threw a punch at the other. The two hit the other's fist and jumped back before Suyin kicked and Suka blocked. Suka attempted to punch Suyin in the jaw, but his elder dropped below the punch and delivered an uppercut that launched Suka a few feet away. Suka flipped around a few times before landing on the ground in a squat and charging again. He reached his elder again and decided to try and use a kick, which was caught. He then grabbed the ground with his hands and channeled chakra to them before throwing Suyin away with his feet that he had yet to let go of. Suyin landed gracefully and threw a hard punch at the charging Suka which landed, flattening Suka who rolled away from a stomp. Things continued like this for a few more minutes until Suyin eventually won by grabbing Suka in a full Nelson and grabbing his neck to snap it. Congratulations, you pass, Suyin said with pride in his voice. Suka smiled a bloody smile before falling forward on his face, unconscious. Suyin sighed, all pride now gone out the window with Suka's consciousness. If only I could demote him alright. Next is Naifu Fuma. Would you please step down here? Orochimaru's assistant arrived in a swirl of wind which just so happened to pick up a rock and drop it on Suka. Before Suyin could tell her to list what skills she would be demonstrating she answered, today I will be demonstrating sealing, medical ninjutsu, and sensory skills. Suyin nodded and then pointed to himself, deciding to test her sensory skills. What chakra affinities do I have and what level of chakra do I have? Water and wind chakra affinities, and you have low cage chakra levels. Very impressive sir. Suyin smiled broadly at the compliment. Well at least one of our jounin applicants know how to show respect. Here, I want you to make an explosive note, chakra sealing note, and a barrier note. He handed Naifu 3 pieces of paper and in an astounding 5 minutes, the required notes were finished and handed back for later use by the village. Very good, we need more sealers in Itagakure, he complimented as he looked over the seals for any mistakes and finding none. Finally, we will bring in a boar while you give us an example of great chakra control. Naifu nodded her understanding at this command and pulled a handful of colored sand. What she was about to do required great chakra control and was the requirement for being a master medic. She closed her eyes in concentration and slowly separated each color of sand with only her chakra. 5 minutes later, she finished and allowed the sand to fall to the ground. She did not get to rest as she wiped some sweat away from her brow and set to healing the boar that was sent in. It had a large cut that almost dissected it if it wasn't for how it was brought in. Naifu pulled out a needle and some thread and slowly sewed the creature back together after setting the internal organs back in place. After she finished that, she healed the cut together and was promoted to Jounin. Orochimaru looked down in interest as his assistant went back up to the stands. While she was not suited for combat at all, she was still a decent fighter if he remembered right. Her true talent was medical ninjutsu and long-range shuriken attacks. Judging from what he had just seen, she had the potential to become as good of a mednin as Tsunade herself. Well, maybe that was stretching just a bit, but still. He really should get Kabuto to train under her whenever he was older. Anyway, it seemed like that Suka boy would be a good ninja in the future as well. He may let him train little Akuma-kun when the boy reached the right age. He would not be able to train him constantly after all. Akuma was bouncing in place as he waited for his father to return from the Jounin exams. He had learned how to talk long ago and was currently using that ability to annoy the hell out of his babysitter. He knew what he was doing and he enjoyed it. To him, anyone who couldn't handle an annoying kid wasn't skilled enough to defend him. In reality, he was calm and quiet most of the time and was always excited to learn new things. He was at a civilian high schooler's level of reading and had already read multiple informative books that enabled him to have a higher vocabulary than most genin. His father would not accept anything less from his successor after all. Hey, when will Papa be back, old man? Will it be later or soon? Hey, are you ignoring me? Papa says ignoring people isn't nice. This went on for a while, and Akuma would be lying if he said that he did not take immense pleasure in it. He was currently dressed in clothing reminiscent of Orochimaru's cloths as a genin, not that he knew that, and had spiky black hair. Akuma didn't know that his hair had been dyed in a small attempt to hide his identity, but if he did he probably wouldn't care. His babysitter, some teenager named Mizuki, who apparently was off on a training trip with his also trader sensei. Oh my god, do you ever shut up? Mizuki finally snapped before he began to cower after being hit by a large amount of Kai, killing intent. What did you just say to my child, Mizuki? There was no mocking tone from Orochimaru this time. There was just a voice as cold as steel and a blade just as cold at his throat. Before he could even mutter out an excuse, he was carried off by two sound chunin, who were equally as angry at him for what he said to Akuma-sama. Orochimaru looked at the Konoha genin get carried off to the experimentation labs before turning back to Akuma with a sigh. Must you do your little tests on every babysitter you get? But father, if they can't handle being annoyed, then how can they be effective ninja enough to defend me? Orochimaru sighed again and put his head in his hands before clapping, startling Akuma. True, very true. I wish I could have brought one of the babysitters you actually like, but they were all at the exams. Akuma shrugged and shakily stood up to his feet to walk to his father. Orochimaru still couldn't contain his shock at the boy some days. He was a genius that was as smart as people 4x his age and could hold an intelligent conversation with him, but still could not fully walk. That wouldn't be until a few months when his training would begin. He still couldn't make up his mind of whether or not he should augment Akuma's abilities like he did for those 2 recruits last year of the many others he had helped. Speaking of which, he was very close to finishing the makeshift bloodline of the Fuma clan. He had decided to call it Iron Release, and all the members that received it and survived, since there was a 20% fatality risk, would form a new clan called the Tetsu clan. Speaking of the clan, 75% of the members had wanted to form a new clan, while the remaining 25% stayed true to their roots. While they didn't have a bloodline, Orochimaru himself was proof that you did not need one to be strong, and he was excited to see what direction the famous clan would take. His research was also doing very well. His new technique that would allow him to achieve a crude form of immortality until he formed a true version of it would take a few more years to complete, and after he finished that he would start working on incomplete techniques that interested him, such as the Ito Tensei technique. On top of that, he would only need a few months to complete the Tetsu bloodline to make it genetic and insert it into members who wanted it. Finally, he was planning a trip to get new members in a few years, probably when Akuma was 7. His goal would be to recruit a personal guard for himself that he would train, as well as a personal guard for Akuma. He would allow Akuma to come with him and handpick his 5 subordinates as well. What are you thinking about, father? Akuma asked by his side. Yes, he would take his lessons like water to a sponge in the future. Just the future, Akuma-kun. Have you read up about Konoha yet? Yes, I think we could even go to the branches of the Hyuga clan for recruits, as long as we can find out how to reverse their seal. Orochimaru stopped in his tracks for a moment before continuing to walk with his son. He had thought about that in the past, but didn't give it much thought. However, his son had just caused him to revisit the idea. All they needed was an event to cause even more resentment from the branch families and a few Hyugas captured to study the seal, and he could have a new clan in his village. So far they only had two real clans, the Fuma clan and the Mamorumasu clan, which specialized in barrier jutsu. They were originally a group from Mist who left during the Third Shinobi World War because they were being sacrificed to allow more valuable shinobi to live in missions or giving them minor missions. Orochimaru had been able to recruit a small clan of 30 people, and they accepted more members until the clan reached 80 members. The clan heads, Hanzaki Fuma and Shiruto Mamorumasu, along with Orochimaru, made up the makeshift council of Itaogakure. He hoped to one day have as much clans as Konoha, but that would be later on. That is a very good idea, Kuma-kun. When you turn 7, would you like to look in Konoha for any possible candidates for your bodyguard squad? At Akuma's fierce nod, he knew that he would probably have to start figuring out how to sneak into Konoha with Akuma. It would be very troublesome to sneak around the Uchiha police, though he knew he could bypass the Byakugan, but he would find a way for his son. As the two continued to walk down the hall, Orochimaru couldn't help but think that the future looked bright for them. Akuma jumped out of his bed in a flash as his alarm clock went off. This was the day. His father would finally begin his real training that wasn't just physical activity. He looked around and smiled as his father had also finally let him decorate his own room. Houses in Odo were mostly stone, but there were a few other materials here and there. He himself lived in the Otokage's mansion, which was pure marble with snake carvings all throughout the building. His room was surprisingly small compared to other rooms in the house, and all he used to have in it was a bed and a closet for his clothes. Now, he had a poster for the up-and-coming ninja team, the Element Destroyers. They were a 3-man team that his father supposedly sent on the most important missions for the village. The members were Ken Tetsu, their close combat master, a young genius recruited last year named Guren, and Orochimaru's old assistant, Naifu Fuma. In addition to the cool poster of those 3 ninjas standing in front of a snake while doing awesome posters, he had a few other things. He had a couch, a television that was programmed with educational channels, a bookshelf filled to the brim with books about psychology, his latest interest, and other things he found interesting, and a few dumbbells. There were no toys as his father, and by extent Akuma, thought that playing around was a waste of time when he could be learning. Speaking of his father, Akuma actually hadn't seen him as much as he used to. Orochimaru was very busy lately with various new experiments and more new recruits coming into the village. They still did not have enough ninja to combat Konoha's forces of 000 shinobi. However, Odo was getting more and more ninja, approaching 2,000 at this point. Akuma knew that his father was starting to get annoyed with all of these jobs he had to do. Odo now had 4 clans with a new one known as the Taranku clan being formed by Suka. What he did was adopt the minimum number of people required for a clan, 25. There were plenty of people willing to be recruited with around 400 people joining the village per year now, but Suka said he wanted a small clan until they could learn how to control the spiders in a way like the Aburam clan. Orochimaru actually helped with that project so that now they could communicate telepathically with the spiders. He was now trying to make their DNA able to produce a hard web-like material that could be used as weapons or armor. One member of the clan that had joined after fleeing to Odo was a very young boy with a biological deficiency, giving him 6 arms instead of 2. His name was Kidomaru or something if he heard his father right, and he was only a year older than him. Akuma finished getting dressed in his training gear. His birthday was yesterday and his father told him to report to the training room about an hour after he woke up. His training gear was made up of gray-plated armor over a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants with bandages wrapped around his right leg's thigh, black sandals with bandages wrapped around his ankles, and a black mask that covered everything below his eyes to his neck. He looked a lot like Orochimaru in his Konoha-Sannin days except for the mask. When he finished getting ready, he went out of his door and headed towards the stairs. The building was a 2-story one and had an amazing 15 rooms. It seemed like there was a room for everything, and in reality there was. Akuma's personal favorite room was the library, where books about everything filled each shelf until they reached the roof. It nearly as big as the Itaogakure library, but it served its purpose. He wondered what his training would be. He was thankful that he learned multiple chakra control exercises during his basic training. Thanks to the Kyuubi, who his father told him about as soon as he could understand what it meant, he was able to access his chakra earlier than most children. Ever since then, he has done nothing but chakra control exercises and taijutsu training. His father even laid out a training plan for him. He would wake up at 5 a.m. then eat special food that gave out the most beneficial nutrients called Odo bars. Then he would start his physical activities for 3 hours. He would then start taijutsu training for 2 more hours, then chakra control for 2 hours, then ninjutsu training for 2 hours, kinjutsu training for another hour, sealing training for another hour, then stealth training for another hour. Finally, he would be out researching and studying various subjects interesting to him or suggested by his father. Luckily, Odo bars kept a person sustained for all day, so he didn't have to waste training time with eating and slept at 8 p.m. to get the healthiest amount of sleep, 9 hours. Most people anywhere else, except for one maniac with a bowl cut, would probably faint at the mere mention of this kind of intense training. This would happen until he was 7 years old. That was when he would choose his personal subordinates and start taking on missions. Personally, he thought that was way too long of a wait, but his father wanted to be sure he could take on anyone when he left the village on missions. Akuma dropped by the kitchen and grabbed an Odo bar before heading towards the training room again. Sure, they tasted horrible, but they did their job, and Akuma hasn't really had anything else anyway. Ukuku, I see you're eager to begin your training, Akuma-kun. Orochimaru chuckled as Akuma was basically bouncing in place right beside him. Yes, father, I am. So what are you going to teach me? A fireball? A wind side? Maybe a giant earth snake? Ukuku, no, Akuma-kun, today I will teach you something much more useful than those petty attack jutsu that so many shinobi, myself included, enjoy using. He put his hands into a cross-shaped seal and then smiled. This jutsu is called the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and with it you will learn 1000 times as fast. Urin cursed softly as she read over the reports of the area she and her team were about to destroy. Recently, a small group of Iwa missing nin had made camp in the northern part of the Land of Sound, but that wasn't what she was cursing about. To back them up, Lord Orochimaru had sent Kabuto and Suka to assist them in the extermination of 20 ninja, ranging from Chunin to Jounin. According to Naifu, who had done some espionage at the camp, there were 3 Jounin in all, while the rest were Chunin. Apparently they were led by the ex-Explosion Corporation captain, Bakuhatsu. The other 2 Jounin were no names, no problem. If she was completely honest with herself, she couldn't see why Lord Orochimaru sent that infuriatingly arrogant jerk Kabuto. She had only met the kid once, and she had to admit he was very skilled for a 15-year-old. She knew he was a Jounin now because of his medical talent, but she did not see how any of that would help them. They already had a medic and had a plan that would work to defeat all of the enemy in the camp below, without the help of another skilled medic and a womanizer with a spider fetish. Ken would make many arrows which Naifu would put explosion notes on and then shoot them at the camp below. Anyone who survived the initial attack would either be picked off by Naifu, skewered by Ken's Nagintina, or cut up by Gurin's crystal blades. Speaking of Ken, he was the only male on the team, but thankfully did not seem that interested in either of them. He was shirtless to be able to make iron weapons anywhere on his body without ripping his clothes and wore purple plants with gold leg warmers. He was bald and his headband covered his entire head with the sound symbol etched into the front. He was also eyebrowless and was 30 years old with a very stern face and many muscles. She had yet to see anyone who could match him with an Argentina, and the only one she had seen beat him into jutsu was Orochimaru himself. However, he did not use ninjutsu much and only seemed to know a few earth-style ones, since his bloodline seemed to automatically give that affinity to all of the Tetsu clan now. She was actually the ninjutsu user of the team, knowing water style, fire style, and earth style ninjutsu, since the crystal style was a combination of all 3. She knew about 30 ninjutsu not including crystal style, thanks to Orochimaru helping train her, and had been learning taijutsu from Ken himself. Naifu was one of the stealthiest people in the village and was the best long-range specialist. All this focus on other things made her medical ninjutsu not nearly as good as it could be. She could still heal a serious injury if they needed it. She also was considered a Jounin level sealer, and though she was nowhere near the Sannin Jiraiya, she was good enough to make longer-range explosive notes. She was just about to finish the plan when who else but Kabuto should bust into the tent. "Hello, how is the strategy coming along?" he asked in that superior tone of his. Kami, if it wasn't for Orochimaru's command she would have beheaded him. "It is finished," she said frostily. "Naifu will fire out the explosive arrows towards the camp and Ken will pick off any survivors with the assistance of myself and Suka. You and Naifu will stay at the back in case of the need for medical assistance." Kabuto frowned at her. "Why aren't you putting me down there with Ken and yourself? Surely, a medic who can defend himself would be a great asset down there." "Well, it's great you can defend yourself, that means that you are perfect for protecting our medic while she is shooting the enemy. We are meeting up on the cliff that overlooks the camp in 5 minutes, get prepared." Kabuto forced himself to smile, "As you wish, Commander." With that statement he left to go meet up with Naifu and leave. Gurin frowned after he left. This was the first mission where she was in charge and she'd be damned if she let him mess it up. 11. There were not enough curses in the dictionary to match all of the, admittedly creative ones Kabuto had come up with for Gurin. Why should he be at the back like some lowly medic? He was able to sever people's nerves for Christ's sake, you'd think that would be good enough to put him at the front lines. He was still a Chunin however, so he really couldn't afford to argue with his superior out in the field or he'd never get a promotion. At least he would be assisting Naifu on the mission. He didn't think his mind could take it if he had to work with another while at the same time not doing anything. Naifu was like an older sister to him, and whenever they met, which were very few times since he was a spy and she did not have much reason to visit Konoha, they would hold long conversations about their medical discoveries and things about their respective villages. He also saw a kindred spirit in her, as she also had to go through Akuma's hell test, as the sound shinobi call it. Now, he was more like an older brother to Akuma and was actually glad to hear that he had begun his training a week before this mission. According to Naifu, he had learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu in less than a day, record time, and was learning Jutsu, Taijutsu, and Kinjutsu styles rapidly thanks to his many clones. The only problem was that he couldn't use as many as he usually did. Kabuto had choked on his own spit when he heard he had made 300 on his first try, but could only use 10, so no information was lost when he was studying scrolls. He also couldn't use them to augment his physical abilities, but people thought that in a few years he would know at least 100 jutsu. To be honest, he hoped that Orochimaru would choose him to train Akuma in a few ninjutsu or chakra control. That was another problem. Many jutsu required less chakra than he had, so he had to constantly train in chakra control, which the clones could not help in either. He knew a few techniques that might help Akuma in the future. Speaking of training, he wondered who would be in charge of his training. Orochimaru was too busy to take care of the complete training, but he did plan to save some time each day to teach his son ninjutsu. He was starting to hold auditions as well for Akuma's senseis, and the line for that was huge when he was last in the village. Akuma, despite his little tests that would make Hibiki proud, was loved by the entire village. To them he was their prince that Orochimaru would make his successor someday. Those that had met him and weren't babysitting him found that they were treated kindly and with respect, which was different from most royalty. And that was what Akuma was in Odo, royalty. Parents dreamed of their daughters marrying him and their sons being his right-hand man or most trusted advisor. Jounin dreamed of training him while Chunin wanted to work with him and Genin wanted to work under him. He was just 3 years old and already had all these people trusting him and praising him. He himself had thought that Akuma would be like Itachi, who faced death at the very young age of 4 during the war, had become cold and withdrawn to almost everyone. Orochimaru did not want Akuma like that all of the time, so he had made the decision to not allow Akuma out of the village until he was 7. Speaking of which, he was tasked with scouting potential candidates for Akuma's squad in the future in Konoha. At the moment he would be looking into the Hyuga clan for potential candidates. Orochimaru had cryptically told him not to worry about the curse seal and look at all Hyuga members about 4 months ago. He was suspicious that all of the seal users of Itagakure had gathered around that time for a very important experiment, but he figured it didn't matter at the moment. Anyway, in Konoha he did not see very many people who would be willing to defect. Orochimaru had made it very clear that he wanted willing people to serve his son, and there weren't very many interesting people who would willingly defect. He shook himself out of his thoughts with a mental bookmark to look into the experiment from earlier, when Naifu said that she was ready and everyone gathered up onto the overlooking cliff. He wasn't sure how many people that Naifu could take out with her arrows, but he would be here to kill any stragglers. He looked down and immediately saw the leader, Bakuhatsu, with his right-hand man next to their little fire. There were tents all around, and he looked to Naifu, who seemed to be thinking off something. She made some Anbu hand signs that Odo adopted from Konoha that basically said, "I will make some flame seals to ignite the tents as well." Han just nodded and made about 30 arrows from 30 pores on his body. He was one of the 5 people in his clan who could do this, the others were only able to use the pores on their hands and arms. The 5 that could use the bloodline like Ken were himself, the clan head, his daughter, his wife, and the clan head's daughter. Anyway, Naifu grabbed the arrows and pulled out a chakra blade from a sheath on the small of her back. It was purely ceremonial. Kabuto was sure it didn't seem to be used to fight. It was pure copper with a shuriken guard and jade handle. He raised an eyebrow as the copper started radiating heat that he could feel from 5 feet away. He then raised the other one when he realized what she was doing. She was using chakra to heat up the blade and then started carving seals into the arrowheads on the iron arrows. In 5 minutes she had managed to do what would take most people an hour, thanks to the heated blade. She nodded, then brought out a scroll which unsealed her prize bow that was crafted by Orochimaru himself. The shaft of the bow was carved wood to look like scales, and 2 snake heads on both ends of the shaft. The bowstring was blood red in color, and many said that it was because it had absorbed all of the blood of those she had slain. She fixed the first arrow onto her bow and pulled it back. Slowly, she took aim and pointed it towards the leader of the missing men. Kabuto looked at the arrow, and his eyes widened when he saw it was an explosive arrow. As soon as the arrow had made contact, it would explode in a radius of 10 yards. She let the arrow fly and it sunk into the leader's head with a loud squelch. His partner could do nothing but watch and let out a half scream as the explosion killed him and also caught one of the tents, killing 2 more. Naifu did not stop for a second and grabbed the fire arrows before shooting them towards every tent. Judging by the screams, a few were caught in the flames, but doing a quick count, Kabuto saw about 10 ninja out in the open. Naifu grabbed 3 arrows at once, all explosive, and they landed in the middle of clusters of enemies. After the explosion, only one remained with his arm missing. Mission accomplished, she said in a smug tone before resealing her bow. Orders, Commander. Dorin sighed as she looked down at the remains of the camp. Naifu always got to have all the fun. She had hoped that at least one of the strong ones would have survived, but Naifu was quickly becoming legendary for her ability to do things like this before the enemy could react. She might even dare to call her an assassin if she didn't have an explosion fetish. Alright, Kabuto, go down there and stop that man's bleeding. Orochimaru-sama wanted us to bring a prisoner to get information about Iwa. Luckily for us it seems like he was one of the Jounin, but it would have been better if we would have gotten Baku's right-hand man instead. She looked over at Naifu with a tick mark at this part, which Naifu promptly ignored. Kabuto sighed as he leapt down the overlook and started heading towards the wounded ninja. He would put him unconscious before stopping the bleeding. The last thing he wanted was some shinobi with his pride wounded, complaining the whole trip back to Odo. As he was healing the man, he couldn't help but think that he wished that he could have fought too. 22. Jiraiya cursed as he came across the dead body of another of his spies in the land of hot water. He was currently in one of the big cities of the country, Ashizumaki. He had heard of a new ninja village being founded that accepted missing nin of all things in their ranks. This was nothing new, but they accepted missing nin from everywhere with no repercussions for their actions. According to his sources, a lot of missions were being taken from the eastern part of the land of hot water and the land of rice paddies. He had only sent his spies here, however, after he heard that a shinobi went to each big city to gather requests from them and the surrounding area around it, including multiple small villages. This made him lean more towards the land of rice paddies, but no one knew where the village was. All they knew was that to get into the village you had to go to the capital and sign up. It was a long process where they wash you down to get rid of any disguises, have a chakra sensor see if you had a henge, and then put you up to a lie detector too and ask some questions. The people in charge of it also had a seal suspiciously like Danzo's root shinobi had, so they could not be interrogated. He would also have to wait a few years until even he was allowed into the village because they were still starting out and were not yet willing to have a sannin in the village. That in of itself was suspicious since they were the first village ever to not allow him to visit. Oh well, he would get in one day, but now he needed to tell his spies to be a bit more careful. It seemed like this new village did not appreciate spies watching them at all. He wouldn't give up though, he had already failed him once, and he'd be damned if he did it again. Hold on Naruto, I'll find you soon and then be the godfather I should have been at the beginning, he whispered out into the air. He did not notice the white snake watching him from the shadows of a nearby alleyway or how it disappeared in a poof of smoke after he left. The Kuma panted as he went through another of his katas. It has been 2 years since his training had begun, and he could confidently say that he could take on most chunin. He was a Jounin level ninjutsu level however, but that was because of his shadow clones. At first he and his father thought that his shadow clones could help him in taijutsu and kinjutsu as well, but he was in for a rude awakening a week later. While they could learn forms and techniques effortlessly, since their body's memories did not transfer, he did get any muscle memory or reflexes from the training. However, over the last 2 years he had been training to increase his mobility, flexibility, and reflexes to get ready for a taijutsu style that his father would teach him personally. Until then however, he would train in the style that Ken-sensei had taught him, Aikido. This fighting style relied on counter-attacking his opponents with throws and strikes that he would enforce with chakra to break bones. He was thinking of incorporating daggers with the style, but that would wait until he became better with them. Speaking of weapons, Ken was very impressed with Akuma's progress as of late. He was Shunin level in both the katana and sai, while Genin level with daggers. Given another few years, Ken was sure Akuma would be Jounin level in all 3 weapons. Also, Akuma had learned a lot about Ken in the past year that he had been his teacher. Ken was the youngest son of the previous leader of the Fuma clan, with his oldest brother being the head of the Fuma clan and the other being head of the Tetsu clan. However, Ken was widely thought of as the strongest in either clans and one who was incredibly loyal to his family, so he was never thought of as a threat for the position of clan head. He came from a large family with 3 brothers and 1 sister. He had to work hard to be noticed by his father, who was always too preoccupied teaching his older brother how to be clan head to worry about his other children. He was considered by all of them the one who took their mother since she had died while giving birth to him and was bullied until he could fight them back. Despite all of this bullying, he eventually proved himself to all of them when an elder of the clan noticed his talent for the clan's taijutsu and kinjutsu styles. He quickly mastered both of them by the age of 10 and was considered the genius of the Fuma clan. He made Chunin at 11 and Jounin at 16 while teaching his siblings how to fight himself. Eventually, his father noticed him and the bullying from his brothers and sister finally stopped and he was respected throughout the clan. However, tragedy struck when the Third Great Shinobi War began. His family was hired by a Wagakure to aid them in the war and they fought Konoha on many occasions. His family was very helpful to Iwa and this caused Konoha to kill any Fuma clan member that they came across. Their unique green hair caused them to be easily targeted and was the reason Ken shaved his head. His brother, the future clan head, was the first Fuma to die in the world. He had been leading a small group of ninja and the next thing he knew, his head was blown off by a lightning-style jutsu by none other than the White Fang of Konoha. Luckily, no more of Ken's siblings died until near the end of the war. Many more Fuma died to enemy shinobi and with each death Ken grew angrier and angrier. Eventually, his anger and eagerness to kill Konoha shinobi resulted in his sister's death by a lucky kunai throw by a genin named Asuma Sarutobi. He had broken that kid's ribs and arms and was about to cave the brat's skull in when his sensei had intervened. He had carved out that idiotic jounin with his Nagintina, but by the time he was done, the brat had escaped. That was the day Ken had forsaken anger as best as he could. He was emotionless and logical most of the time, and being the reason his sister died, had left him in a deep depression that made the light leave his once bright hazel eyes. He reminded Akuma of steel, cold, uncaring, and deadly. That was probably one of the reasons of the man's nickname, Black Steel. Enough thinking Akuma. There will be no time to think on the battlefield. As Ken said this he threw a few kunai that Akuma was forced to deflect. Whenever he got lost and thought he would get kunai launched at him. He was forced to choose between deflecting or dodging depending on the weapon or situation, and getting it wrong would result in a particularly painful Taijutsu match. Now, surely you can cut the boy some slack Ken-kun, a chuckling voice said from the doorway. Ken grew a tick mark above his, well Akuma was going to say eyebrow but, which was a rare occurrence. I really wish you wouldn't call me that Otakage-sama, Ken said in a voice that signaled he was annoyed, not that anyone who didn't know him could tell. Orochimaru smirked and shrugged nonchalantly. Fine, so how's Akuma-kun's training going Ken-chan? Ken put his face in his palms and breathed in and out slowly. Orochimaru loved to make Ken angry, it was just so fun to rile the war veteran up. He is quickly mastering the weapons which I have decided to train him in. I have taught him the Suresu Kenjutsu style and he is very proficient with Sai as well. Daggers are still a work in progress, but he should become Chunin level with them soon. Also, he is high Chunin in the Aikido Taijutsu style and should become Jounin level soon. Orochimaru smiled at his son's progress. He would be his successor and he will enjoy hearing about him in the future from faraway lands. Of course it would also be nice to have someone at his level helping with experiments. He finally found a way to gain temporary immortality, but he would need a body to possess before he tested out his new method. He would send Kabuto a message to record Uchiha going out on missions so that he could get a few to possess. As Orochimaru looked at Akuma he remembered something else. Project Falcon was going to happen soon. Oh how he could not wait for that, people would be talking about the event for centuries, all because of little Akuma-kun there. Well, that is good to hear. You are such a good teacher in fact that I think it would be wise to give you a genin team in the future. Ken's head snapped to Orochimaru after he had looked off momentarily. Not many people knew this, but Ken had always wanted to be a sensei, ever since he had first started to help his siblings learn how to fight. I thank you Otakage-sama, Ken said while bowing low. Orochimaru simply chuckled at the man and signaled for him to leave. He nodded and left the training room with a small grin on his face. The man was as strong as the copy ninja Kakashi, it would be good to have a few ninja be taught by someone like him. Alright, Akuma-kun, you remember what today is right? Orochimaru asked. Akuma nodded excitedly, it is the Odo festival right? The Odo festival was a festival Orochimaru himself had made to increase moral and economy for the village. It was to celebrate the founding of Atagakure and was one of the few days that anyone was allowed into the village. Of course Ensers and their version of Anbu, the serpents, would be watching the visitors at all times, but it was a chance for new clients to see their village. They would also hold multiple events like a play that included well-known missions, like the time Black Steel destroyed a bandit-occupied samurai base single-handedly or the time Orochimaru and his teammates fought Hanzo. But Orochimaru's exact memory of the event of course, and a tournament between 4 of Odo's best shinobi whose abilities were already in the bingo book so they could use the one said. The participants were Ken Tetsu, Gurin, Naifu Fuma, and Suka Taranku. Yes, now you need to get ready before we leave. We wouldn't want the Sound Prince to look like a bum. Father, Akuma whined. You know I don't like that name, it makes me sounds lame. I want one like Black Steel or Green Beast. Well you'll have to earn a new name son. Don't worry, I am sure you will in due time, Orochimaru said with a smile that would make most run in fear, but was comforting to Akuma. He rubbed his son's hair and sent him off to his room to get ready for the tournament. He smiled and ran off to his room. He was extremely excited to see his Taijutsu sensei fight his ceiling sensei and hear another story about his father's ninja days. Orochimaru looked at where he left, then looked down at his hand with a frown. His dye was wearing off and he was too old to think it was natural now. It seemed like he would have to tell him of his true parentage soon. Hopefully it would not cause him to defect from the village. Orochimaru cursed in his head, thinking of Akuma as a son had been an unexpected factor in his plan. No, Akuma wouldn't defect. He was more of a father to him than Minato was. That blonde bastard left the child alone in a village filled with hatred and malice. He didn't know why, but he hated him for that more than for taking his Hokage position. Akuma looked around excitedly as he and his father walked through the streets. He was dressed in a purple kimono with golden snakes running across it, as well as the Odo village symbol on his back. His hair was slicked back instead of spiked up like usual, and he had a necklace given by the Land of Sound's feudal lord that was solid silver in the shape of a dragon. His father was dressed in his Odokage garbs that looked exactly like the Hokage's, but instead of red coloring there was purple. All around them civilians and shinobi bowed before going back to business, and his father seemed to find it especially amusing when shinobi from Konoha bowed to him. He had already learned from his father the reasons he defected and why he experimented on those innocent people. He did not blame him if he was honest. To make his home stronger, he would do anything as well. He just had to marvel at the stupidity of Konoha. They chose a blonde war hero who was charismatic but golden-hearted instead of a much more competent shinobi. When he ruled Odo, and he would rule Odo, he would make sure nothing like that happened in his village. "What's that, father?" Akuma asked as he pointed to a stand that was selling some foreign food. "Oh, that is an Akimichi food stand. They have restaurants in every village and will probably be asking for permission to make a restaurant here as well." "But why? Don't Konoha shinobi hate you?" Orochimaru smirked at his son's question. He was certainly a genius from all the books he and his shadow clones have read, but he still had a lot to learn about tactics. He also would have to hide his Icha books harder from Akuma. It was a dirty little secret that every male shinobi owned one of the books from a series. While he was an idiot, he had to admit Jiraiya certainly had a gift with books. He would have to see if he would consider selling the franchise in Odo as well. He looked to his son to see him still waiting for an answer. That was the problem with people, they always talked and expected you to talk as well. But soon Akuma would be so much more than human, he would be a shinobi. Well, if they made a shop here then they would have a prime opportunity to spy on our activities. Not only that, but it would make them, and by extension, Konoha, more money. I'm sure it is somewhat amusing to them to constantly receive money from their enemies. Akuma nodded at this information and filed it away to ponder about later. Meanwhile, Orochimaru thought about certain plans that were about to unfold. His village was doing decent economically, but it needed much more franchises from other countries to come in. Businesses like the Gato Company and Akimichi cafes were needed to keep the economy steady. While missions were still the main focus of economy, Orochimaru did not want to turn into what Suna is turning into, a village that depends on nothing but missions. Plus, opening up his village to foreigners would make it like all of the other villages, and the spies that no doubt would come in would be great for experimentation. "Hey, father, what is that?" Akuma asked politely. He really did teach his son well, didn't he? Orochimaru looked over towards where he was pointing and saw a ramen stand that little Minato and Kushina had always eaten at. They must have wanted to get more business or start a franchise. Oh well, Akuma probably wouldn't like ramen anyway. What harm would there be in letting him have some? Now, many things could be said about Orochimaru. Some said he was evil, some said he was a genius, some said he was the leader of Odo that would make it rise to greatness. But no one had ever said that Orochimaru was a crier. Be that as it may, the great Snake Sanin really felt like crying as he and his son left the ramen stand. For a second there he thought he might have had to tap into the village treasury just to be able to afford feeding his son. After that, he had looked at him with that damn puppy-eyed jutsu that he was going to kill Kabuto for teaching to him and asked if they could allow the stand to make a franchise there. Needless to say, in a month or two Ichiraku's ramen would have a new stand right there in the middle of Odo. Apparently the man's daughter would be the one in charge of it, while Tucci, if he remembered his name right, would run the one in Konoha with the aid of a civilian named Nodoru Haruno from the Haruno civilian clan. While he was at it, he also gave the Akimichi cafe owners permission to open up a franchise in Odo. He also said that any Akimichi that wanted to move to Odo could as well, but he wasn't very hopeful in that event happening. The mighty leader of Odo looked down into his empty wallet and prayed that when the new Ichirakus opened up that they would give a cage discount. "So, I am guessing you like the ramen, Akuma-kun?" Orochimaru asked with a small laugh as Akuma patted his stomach. "That had to be the best food I ever tasted, father. Even Hakura-san didn't have food that go oomph." Akuma was cut off as Orochimaru rapidly covered his mouth and looked around for Hakura. He breathed a sigh of relief as a dark shape with fire in her eyes and a pan in her hand backed into the alley of which she came from. The Kura was the owner of Hikura's Diner, the best restaurant in all of Odo, and to insult her cooking was like calling an Akimichi fat. He still had a bruise from when she had snuck up on him one day for calling her food mediocre. "Now Kuma, what have I told you about saying stuff about that woman's food?" Orochimaru said, getting completely serious. "That if I did it then a demon stronger than all the Sannin combined would come get me." Orochimaru started to sweat as he felt eyes boring into the back of his head at his answer. He was not scared of anyone, especially not a 50-year-old woman who had a good swing with a frying pan. "No, the other thing. Oh, that Hikura-san is the best cook in all of the world and that we should never insult her cooking, since insulting her cooking is just lying to ourselves." "There you go," Orochimaru said in relief as he led his son away from the demon woman. Whenever someone tried to destroy his village, he wouldn't even bother telling his ninja to defend it, he would just tell that woman the enemy insulted her cooking. Orochimaru and Akuma walked through the village and stopped at many more stands and attractions. There were fishermen selling fish caught by workers in the Gato corporations, blacksmiths from the land of iron showing off their handiwork, authors from the land of rivers trying to sell some of their new books, and many more. Eventually, Orochimaru had decided to allow many of them to set up businesses in Odo. While the ninja force was doing fantastic, the civilian residents did not have much to see or do in Odo. Sure, they could always go to the marketplace, but there was no bookstore, no clothing store, not many restaurants besides Hikura's, and just not much to do in general. The more businesses he allowed into Odo, the more jobs the civilians would get. This meant more D-rank jobs, since everyone would be busy with the jobs they just got to do it themselves. Maybe he should ask the feudal lord if his wife had a cat. He wouldn't allow more than 3 Konoha businesses in his village, however. He wasn't stupid, and he knew that if he let all the ones who applied in, it would be hard to catch Konoha spies that entered the village under the pretext of leading the new businesses. However, he was glad that he would get some franchises into his village. Maybe in the future, Odo will turn out like Konoha, only twice as good. Looking down at Akuma, Orochimaru had no doubt that it was a possibility. 21. Jiraiya smiled as he walked through the streets of Itagakure. He knew who led the village and all the experiments that went on in the labs, but he still enjoyed seeing all of the happy people. He also had to applaud Orochimaru's cleverness in the law that he made as soon as the village was founded. There were no prisons here because of his law, only the labs. If you broke any of the laws you were experimented on, and that was that. It was one of the reasons there was so little crime in the city. Even if you survived the experimentation, you would never be the same again. From what he's heard, they experimented on people to test out certain artificial bloodlines before applying them. So far they had made unique bloodlines for both the Tetsu and Taranku clans, with many other ninja running around with experimental bloodlines, just waiting to be tested. He heard of a boy that could move his bones around to keep them from breaking, and another who could absorb chakra, but since the two did not want to start a clan and Orochimaru still felt like the tests were not finished, it was not a clan bloodline around here. Of course there were a dozen other artificial bloodlines that Orochimaru apparently made, but they either weren't valuable enough to distribute through a clan or just weren't genetic. He'd be impressed with how his old teammate managed to create a new bloodline from scratch if he wasn't so utterly disgusted. As it was, he was just visiting Odo for the festival and to gather information about the town. He recognized some of the seals around the cavern as Uzumaki seals, but other than that couldn't find out much. It turned out that all Odo shinobi had a seal like Danzo's root shinobi put on them. This made it near impossible to interrogate them, but he could still find out some information about Odo life. Apparently there was a boy that was being groomed to be Odo's second Odokage in the future named Akuma. He could not get a description of the boy, but he was willing to bet it was Naruto. He would abduct him if he wasn't put under constant guard to prevent plans like his. He could easily defeat his guards, but he knew they had some other method in place that would probably result in him fighting Orochimaru himself. He would bide his time until little Naruto went off on a mission, then he would bring him back home. Jiraiya looked down at the pamphlet he got at the gates for the tournament most shinobi came to see. The first round would be Kentetsu vs Guren and Suka Taranku vs Naifu Fuma. Maybe he would find some interesting information before the tournament ended. He looked below the information about the tournament and got a shit-eating grin at what he saw. Right below it was a coupon for Odo's brand new community hot springs, and Jiraiya was happy to offer his professional opinion on them. With a whistle and a skip in his step he headed right towards the promised steamy goodness. Little did he know, Orochimaru was patting himself on the back for the best distraction in the world. The sound daimyo walked through the crowds of people in Odo, with a grace befitting his royal lineage, along with his personal guard. Odo had graciously given the man Jounin-level bodyguards to guard him or keep him in line. He was the youngest daimyo in the entire elemental countries at 15 years old, after his father was killed by these ninja for stepping out of line. He had little doubt that they took him to this tournament to show him just how strong a few of their ninja were. He didn't care if they were strong or weak if he was honest. His country had been doing better under his rule than it had in years, and his father was an asshole anyway. His mother had left the country when he told her his opinions, despite the fact that the bastard abused the young lord constantly. She never stopped loving him. "Tenshi-sama, we are at the stadium," the leader of his personal guard told him. He sighed in exasperation, but did not dare say his thoughts aloud. He could obviously see the giant stone colosseum that looked exactly like the ancient Roman ones everyone learned about in school. He walked through the main gates while his head guard exchanged hand signals with the gate guard to make sure no one was an impostor. He went inside of the colosseum and towards the important guest area. It was a secured area with stone walls surrounding every side except for the front, where the fights were taking place. As he entered the area, he saw some faces he easily recognized. The most important of these were Gato from Gato Shipping, Jiraiya of the Sannin, and the Hot Water Daimyo. After a brief moment of indecision, Kenshi walked over to the Hot Water Daimyo and sat down. "Hello, Michael-san. What are you doing here?" Kenshi asked good-naturedly as he sat down. Michael was about 30 years Kenshi's senior, so he deserved the proper respect when being talked to. Michael sighed and lit up a cigarette before taking a long drag. The man had been a close friend of Kenshi's father, and his death had added many years to the man, but he was still thought to have one of the best minds for politics. "I am deforming my country's ninja village," he confessed after a minute of silence. He held up his hand to halt any questions from his junior daimyo. "I know what you want to say. I am aware of the repercussions of deforming a ninja village. It really isn't even a village anymore. Besides one promising genin who just so happens to worship the damn devil, there are barely any talented ninja. The village is filled with 500 chunin and about 50x as many civilians, so there is no point in even keeping a village anymore." "But, aren't you worried of your country being taken over by Konoha Kurigakure?" Kenshi asked worriedly. To the teenager's dismay, Michael just shrugged. "I don't really care about the land anymore. My wife is dead from cancer, my children killed in a fire, my best friend killed in a bandit raid. I have no one else and can't really care about anything anymore. However, I am still the leader of my country, and I have made a decision." He looked at Kenshi and smirked slightly, the only thing besides a frown he had done. "Instead, if I am impressed by the strength of this village, I am willing to give you control of all my lands, while giving the Otakage permission to make a ninja outpost in the country." Kenshi's eyes were so wide he thought that his eyelids would fly off at any moment. This would be the biggest diplomatic deal in the history of the elemental countries. "And what happens if you aren't impressed?" Kenshi asked warily. Michael smirked again at the boy. "Well, then I will probably either turn all my land over to Snow Country, Fire Country, or just keep it all and become a vacation resort for all of the other countries. Let's hope your ninja impress me. I can't stand any of those other daimyos." Kenshi nodded dumbly and signaled one of his guards to tell the Otakage about this new development. If they got this land, then their territory would increase to the same size as the Land of Iron. Kenshi smiled as he thought up schemes and ideas in his head. Maybe it was time to recruit a samurai force of their own to combat the Land of Irons. It would take years, but if they played their cards right they could become big enough to be a major country. Sure, it would take a ton of bloodshed and risk, but Kenshi was extremely ambitious, which was why Orochimaru let him live in the first place. He had to stifle a chuckle as he looked down into the arena floor as the first competitors came out. All of his plans were riding on these 4 shinobi, they'd better now mess up. Jiraiya leaned forwards as 2 of the 4 competitors left the floor so the other 2 could fight. He had seen the bingo book entries and knew that these 2 shinobi were approaching S-class level. Even if he didn't get any information, this would be an interesting fight. 21. Beto chuckled as he saw the 2 ninja in the field. The bald man looked strong, but the purple-haired girl looked weak and frail. If she was one of Oto's best, he probably wouldn't be doing much business with them after all. Oh well, perhaps he could gain blackmail material to use on this super strong ninja Orochimaru. He signaled to his mercenaries to be on lookout while he recorded the battle with a camera he smuggled into the arena. He was sure someone would pay big money for the man's techniques and fighting style. Before he could even start the recording, his camera was destroyed with a kunai and he was left with a destroyed camera in his hands. Damn ninja, they always meddled with everything. Orochimaru and Akuma were both seated at the front of the stands on an entirely separate section reserved just for cages and future cages. As Orochimaru looked down at his ninja, he smirked. He could practically feel his son's excitement and, not wanting to keep the boy waiting, he signaled for the fights to start. 11. Hen frowned as he looked over his opponent for the first battle of the tournament. He knew better than to underestimate the woman, he had helped train her after all, and was trying to find a way to win without harming her too bad. He shook that thought out of his head immediately. If she ever found out he went easy on her, then there would be hell to pay. He sighed as he remembered the one time she had told her wife some completely untrue information and he was forced to sleep on the couch for a month. As soon as Orochimaru signaled the fight to start, the two sound shinobi leapt back to opposite ends of the arena and prepared their techniques. Iron style. Black steel, Ken said as he formed a few hand seals for the S-rank technique he received his name from. Many spectators' eyes widened in amazement as iron started to seep out of every pore on Ken's shirtless body and form an extra layer of skin around his entire body. However, this technique was S-rank because it did not impede movement at all, and the dark metal was several times stronger than steel because it continually compressed until any more would result in loss of movement. Gurin just smiled at the middle-aged man and started some hand seals of her own. She was unable to finish as Ken's body flickered to her with his fist raised back. Seeing no other option, she burrowed underground and reappeared several yards away from her old teacher. She tried the hand seals again and frowned as she realized it might not even work. Crystal style. Crystal lance. She yelled out as she stuck her arm out to the right. A large lance made of a purple crystal formed on her arm and she immediately charged at the man. He made the iron covering his hand shift into a saw blade and ducked under the lance. He slashed towards the lance and his blade embedded itself inside the crystal by an inch. He used his other hand to hit Gurin in the face but was surprised when it was stopped by a hand covered with crystal. Crystal armor, she said smugly before using her lance to throw Ken away from her. He flipped around right before hitting the ground and stared impassively at Gurin. She could imagine him frowning, but she couldn't see his face behind all of that iron, so she couldn't tell. She cancelled her lance jutsu since it was obvious it wasn't going to work and Ken wouldn't fall for the same trick twice. Gurin jumped into the air to try out a new technique she was working on. Crystal style. Shuriken wild dance. She yelled before throwing her hands out straight on either side of her body. Crystal particles surrounded the woman before condensing into shuriken and heading towards Ken at high speeds. He just stood still and allowed the crystals to hit him head on. Gurin landed softly and waited for the dust to clear that came up when the shuriken landed. When it finally did clear, she saw Ken standing there with his armor receded back into pores and a hand seal she recognized as one of his strongest techniques. Iron style. Iron dragon jutsu. He yelled out with a smirk as a dragon formed from the pores on his back. Gurin took a step back as a dragon made entirely out of hard iron and with yellow eyes looked down at her. With a roar, the dragon charged at her and she scowled. Crystal style. Crystal encampment wall. She thrust her hands forward and from the giant wall of red crystal, blocked the path of the dragon to her. This did almost nothing as the dragon smashed through 3/4 of the wall before even slowing down. It continued to slowly destroy the wall, but it made a huge mistake. With a single hand seal from Gurin, the wall started to repair itself with the dragon still inside of it and eventually trapped the beast inside. With another 2 seals, the wall split into countless crystal pieces with the dragon being destroyed as well. It wasn't over yet however. This is a Ken. Crystal style. Giant hexagonal shuriken. She finished forming the necessary hand seals and the pieces of crystals combined to form many giant crystal shuriken that launched to Ken. Ken watched wide-eyed as he did a few rapid seals that Jiraiya was sure only Kakashi could see. Earth style. Mud wall, he said with a bit of desperation in his voice. Right before the shuriken tore through the wall he did 10 more hand seals and put his hands on the wall. Iron style. Iron reinforcement. He yelled out from strain as an iron coating covered the entire wall on both sides. He dropped to a knee as the attack embedded all the shuriken through the wall and Ken looked to see one only halfway still in the wall. Ken cursed slightly as he realized he wouldn't be able to use many more iron style jutsu. He needed chakra to replenish his iron supply and he had used up most of it. On the bright side, he thought seriously. It seems little Gurin is almost out as well. He was right as Gurin was leaning on her knees while looking at the giant iron wall that was in the middle of the field. She cancelled her crystal jutsu and the giant shuriken dissipated into nothingness, making the wall no longer have enough support with all the holes and fall down. She didn't have any time to let Ken recover, so she used the last of her chakra to body flicker behind him and hold a kunai to his neck. It's over. I win, she said with confidence. Did you really? Ken asked as he turned into mud and Gurin felt a kunai on her throat this time. Seeing as she was out of chakra and felt like she was going to pass out at any time she sighed and raised her hand. I surrender, she said sullenly. There was complete silence in the Colosseum until the first person clapped. Soon there was cheering and clapping from every part of the arena. Ken had the audacity to back up and bow before stumbling back to the combatants area while the medics came to replenish both of their chakra. She followed after Ken and fell in step beside him. So, Ken, when did you develop that wall technique? Gurin asked, feeling a bit ashamed about underestimating the man just because he had not been on a mission with her in a while. She had realized when he made that 20-yard tall and 15-yard wide wall that he was anything but soft. He just shrugged with a small smile on his face, something she had only seen once. Akuma and I like to spar every now and then. I can easily defeat him in anything but ninjutsu. Don't get me wrong, mine are still stronger than his, but he helped me realize that I needed a defense against powerful and widespread attacks after he used his dragon flame bullet barrage on me. It takes about a quarter of my chakra to use it though, so I need to work on it some more. Gurin was left wide-eyed at his explanation. He decided he needed a better defense jutsu because of some kid. Sure, he was Orochimaru-sama's kid, but he was still a kid. She also noticed some pride in Ken's voice and sighed. It was a shame, it looked like he was not going to return to their squad after all. She still hoped she could convince Orochimaru to get Suka off her team though. That ass was a major pain. Haha, you ready to get started, sweet cheeks? Suka asked the beautiful woman next to him. Naifufuma did not say a word to betray her intentions and swiftly pushed Suka off to the arena floor. Aw, how come you get to be the one to do that? Gurin pouted when she came up the stairs. Because you reveal your intentions too soon. As annoying as he is still an A-rank ninja, despite his age, and can easily see what you want to do before you do it. She could see Gurin was about to say something about being an A-rank too, and decided to start the match before an argument could ensue. She did not like talking got ninja like her father killed. Talking revealed information to the enemy that led them to your village. Talking made your once kind cousin emotionless and led him away from the clan. Naifu shook her head as she thought these things. Shinobi did not dwell on past thoughts, they acted based on the information available to them. She would show them all this when she defeated Suka. Gurin just sighed as she sat down in one of the front row seats next to Ken, who took a soldier pill. Naifu had been steadily getting worse and worse over the course of their time together. Now she barely did anything without exact information and was extremely cold. She once saw her not heal a person who was crushed by a building because he would have died anyway. It would just be a waste of chakra. Gurin frowned for a moment before making up her mind. After the tournament she would go to Orochimaru directly and hope he took her off of active duty. Even if he defected, she knew he kept some ideas from Konoha, especially their ideas of teamwork. He believed in it so much that the academy had a phrase put up above the stone entrance to the academy. It said, "Those that break the rules and regulations are scum. But those who abandon their comrades are less than scum." Kakashi Haddock, the copy ninja. She did not understand the quote if she was honest, it really depended on the mission in her opinion. Oh well, she did not need to understand it, all she had to do is convince her cage to help her comrade. That was mean, Naifu-chan, Suka whined while he stood up from his prone position on the floor. A shinobi, mean is not in our vocabulary, she said softly while dropping into a jujutsu fighting stance. Suka stood at 5'11" while Naifu was 5'7", so she wanted to use this style to negate the size advantage. The two also looked very different from the mission with each other and Kabuto those few years ago. Suka was much more muscular thanks to standard introductory training with Ken and now wore his hair in a small ponytail. He wore a white shirt with a purple obi and black pants. His Odo forehead protector shined as he dropped into his patented spider style. This relied on swift movements and speedy strikes similar to Orochimaru's fighting style, but incorporated with his clan's web jutsus and new sticky gold techniques. Naifu also looked a bit different. She wore a navy blue shirt with fishnet underneath and had her green haircut to be very short. She wore black cargo pants with boots that were iron-studded. She had two tantos slung over her back with a large scroll fixated on the small of her back. Suka was about to say something smartest, but had to rapidly dodge as Orochimaru gave the signal to start and a barrage of shuriken headed towards him. He rolled away to dodge them, but body flickered away when Naifu used chakra strings to send the shuriken his way again. He did not get much time to think as another barrage of shuriken headed towards him as soon as he flickered away. As he leapt to the left he was forced to use a substitution with a nearby rock from Ken's wall from earlier. Ha, is that all you can do, throw shuriken? He was forced to dodge again from another barrage completely controlled by chakra strings. Or that was what he thought until he saw all the shuriken, but 3 disappear after hitting the ground. Wow, so you made shuriken bunshin to trick me into wasting my chakra by dodging. Smart. This time he pulled out a kunai when she sent her next barrage, but was surprised when the other shuriken were real too. The shuriken hit his heart and with a gaping mouth he fell to the ground right where he turned into water. Suka reappeared on the top of the nearby pond that was made for water-style users. Naifu noticed too late that her opponent was forming seals before he made the final one and smirked at her. Water style. Wild water wave. He yelled as he put the seal in front of his mouth and a strong stream of water shot towards Naifu. She ducked under it, but that was exactly what Suka wanted as he made a water clone who used the same jutsu from below. She couldn't dodge this one and got hit by it and shot towards the other end of the arena. It was not over yet however, as Suka formed some more seals and touched the wet ground leading to her. Lightning style. Thunderbolt, he said in sorrow for a fight ending so soon. The electricity shot towards Naifu and hit her body where it turned into mud. Suka rapidly dispelled his own clones and turned around, forming hand seals. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. While it was not as big as the famous Great Fireball Jutsu, it still formed a decent-sized fireball that shot towards the approaching Naifu. She did not break stride and pulled out a seal from one of her many pockets. She threw it at the flames, and the fire seemed to be absorbed into the seal. Jiraiya smirked up in the stands as he recognized it as a fire containment seal that he used often. Naifu did not stop there and pulled out both of her tantos and stabbed both of them into Suka's gut. Or she would have, if a strange golden liquid had not come out of his stomach and solidified before the weapon struck. Her tantos simply broke as they flew off the hard surface, and she was caught in a web that Suka shot at her from his mouth. "Heh, you lose," he said with a smirk while forming hand seals. He put his palms onto the ground and said with a grin, "Earth style. Earth prison jutsu." A large dome appeared over Naifu and closed off with a loud boom. She would suffocate until she passed out, which Suka could feel. At least that was the plan. Instead, Naifu grabbed Suka's feet and brought him below the ground. Earth style. Inner decapitation jutsu, she said softly as she appeared out of the ground a foot in front of Suka. Before Suka could counter, she threw a seal that completely sealed off the victim's chakra onto his forehead. He was left gaping up at the woman as he passed out from chakra exhaustion. Many people were shocked that she had won, but some people like Gurren and Orochimaru easily saw why he lost. Suka had been overconfident and did not use his best techniques, instead using his mediocre ones, while Naifu tired him out and made him think that was all she could do. She always had a good supply of seals for every situation and used them expertly to put down her opponent. Suka could probably defeat her eventually in a full-on fight, but because of his actions, he was defeated by the smarter person. As everyone clapped, Naifu's simply body flickered back to the stands. She had only needed about 15% of her chakra because of Suka's stupidity. After using her chakra scalpels to cut through the webbing that trapped her, she just needed to use that simple D-rank jutsu to escape and incapacitate Suka. She figured the only real reasons her chakra went down at all were the shuriken clones and shuriken shadow clones. There was also the clone she used and the small amount of chakra needed for chakra scalpels, unsealing items, and D-rank jutsus. She sighed as she realized how stupid it was not to let the battle play out some more. Sure, she might have lost, but the people would be much more impressed. Orochimaru sighed in exasperation as he saw Naifu's body flicker back to the stands. He would have preferred if she had put on more of a show or at least gotten Suka out of the ground, but a win was a win. He looked down at his son, and as much as he tried to hide it, Orochimaru still noticed the disappointment on his son's face. He chuckled and rubbed his son's head. "Relax, Akuma-kun. The next fight should prove to be the most interesting. Just imagine it, brain versus brawn, one of the oldest styles of fighting in history. Aren't you excited for it?" Akuma nodded reluctantly but pouted at his father rubbing his head in public. It was just embarrassing. He fruitlessly attempted to move his father's hand before sighing and allowing him to continue ruffling his hair. "I don't know. It will be weird to see my sealing sensei and my taijutsu sensei fight each other. I just don't know who to root for." Orochimaru chuckled at his son's predicament as he signaled for a 30-minute break to start. He wondered how Project Falcon was going. It would be a shame if all of his work to get the tournament aired in Konoha was ruined by no one watching it. Oh well, if that was not enough of a distraction, he was sure Kabuto could come up with something. He was a smart kid after all. Kabuto snuck around Konoha slowly towards the Hyuga clan compound. This was the day. After a few years of study and failure, a Togeker had finally created a seal that could counter the Hyuga curse seal. Project Falcon was probably the biggest mission ever attempted in any of the villages to his knowledge. Orochimaru had put this plan in motion ever since his son had inadvertently given him the idea. This was the only day they could ever put this plan into motion, as the 20 patrollers were all branch members part of the plan, and the main branch member supervising them was poisoned earlier at the cafe he goes to many times. The plan was relatively simple, but was so risky that no one had ever had the nerve to try it. Orochimaru wasn't like everyone else. The plan was to unseal all of the guards with a paper seal that was similar to a chakra suppression seal, but took all of the chakra out of only the seal, therefore making it useless, but not erasing the seal. Afterwards, all 20 guards would create shadow clones to go throughout the clan and erase all branch member seals. And then the fun would start, Kabuto thought with an evil smile. He had always taken great pleasure in giving people what they deserve and actually dreamed of founding something similar to Konoha's police force in the future in Odo. The branch family of the Hyuga numbered at around 500 people, while the main branch only had 50 people. With the curse seal, the main branch could always quell any uprising that would ever form, but with it gone, the branch family could overtake the main branch with pure numbers. Most would be killed while distracted by the tournament on the radio, and Kabuto was thankful that the Hyuga clan never gave off much chakra while fighting the others so that Anbu would not catch on to the revolt. After the main branch was taken care of, then Kabuto would use a summoning scroll to summon many Earth-style ninjutsu users. That was when it got complicated. The Anbu would no doubt notice the large amount of chakra used for the summoning technique, too large for any Hyuga to use normally. That was why he would have many Hyuga patrolling the wall before he put the plan in motion to explain that they were working on a new clan technique that used a ton of chakra. If the Anbu did not listen, they were ordered to exterminate them and hide them behind the wall. As Kabuto was met outside the wall by one of the guards, he decided to go over terms. "Now, Hyuga-san, Orochimaru-sama wants me to tell you that in return for us erasing the seal, helping you kill the main family, and getting you outside of Konoha and persecution, he will need you all to do a few things. At least half of you will be required to join a Togakur. The remaining family will be split into 3 combat groups, all led by a different commander, the Hyuga Medic Unit, Hyuga Archery Unit, and Hyuga Taijutsu Unit, and all information about Konoha will be revealed to him." The man looked sickened to know that they were making a deal with Orochimaru, but he eventually sighed and nodded his head wearily. "To get freedom we will even make deals with the devil," he mumbled sadly. "However, only 300 of us will be in on the plan, 100 of the others are just too loyal. We will all join our village for protection under one condition." He looked at Kabuto very seriously at this last part. "You will not do harm to the Hyuga heiress, Hinata Hyuga. If Hisashi was willing to give his life for the girl, then we will allow her to win. Also, Niji Hyuga will be part of an elite unit that will give him proper training, no exceptions." Kabuto gave the man an eerie smile and put out his hand. The Hyuga looked at it for a long moment before sighing and shaking it. "Good, I am glad that is settled. And do not worry about Niji, he will be put on a team with the heir of Odo himself if I have anything to say in the matter. Here." Before the man could respond, Kabuto handed him a large stack of papers with sealing writing all over the front of it and walked towards the gates. "Now let's get this party started." Arashi Hyuga was one of the most esteemed people in all of the Hyuga clan after 50 years of hard work and careful manipulation. He had been accepted into the main branch on his 20th birthday after marrying a noblewoman and being on a respected shinobi team that had contributed greatly in both the Second and Third Shinobi World Wars. He was easily Jounin level, but his true talents laid in deception and manipulation. He had been the one to convince the previous clan heir to make the law that made the youngest child of any main branch member be forced to have the seal put onto them. He had also helped make the decision to change the seal from one that simply kept the Byakugan from the enemy's hands into one that made all branch members their servants. He also had a son, only one as his wife was not strong enough to survive the birth, who was also high up in the ranks. The two had been trying to sabotage the standing of Hinata Hyuga ever since her birth. The Hyuga affair had been his best work of art in his personal opinion. Of course, all it did was convince their clan head to have another child, but at least he got rid of the branch family's most influential member. Oh well, he could always do something about his dear wife in the future. As he walked down the halls of the main branch compound to his room, he noticed something a bit off in the room next to his. In a flash he was in front of his son's door and slammed the door open with his Byakugan activated. He soon wished that he had not done so as he saw his son and his wife both dead on the ground and could see in vivid detail the states of their internal organs with his eyes. He narrowed his eyes at the men responsible for this, 3 branch members of all things, and put his hand in a single seal. How dare they ruin all of his hard work? He would have been the father of the clan head and would have had even more influence if they hadn't ruined it all. Oh, he was going to enjoy killing them. Pain. He yelled out in rage but was soon left gasping as one of them moved at high speeds and hit his heart with a Jaiken strike to the heart. How? Hirashi gasped out as blood started to flow down from his mouth. The branch member just smirked and wiped off the curse seal with a smug look. "We aren't your slaves anymore, old man. When you meet Taiyo in the afterlife, tell him his old teammate sent you." Right before Hirashi died, he recognized the smug bastard. Ryu was the name of the man, one of the best trackers in Hyuga history. Taiyo had been the one who made it to where Ryu wasn't accepted into the main branch since he was unneeded competition. How disgusting being defeated by someone lesser than him. Taiyo deserved to rot in hell for that. With that last positive thought, Hirashi saw nothing but darkness. Kabuto smiled as he crept through the halls of the clan head's home with 4 Hyuga members. They had been haggling over the details of the Odo deal for the past hour, so it was good to have a bit of stress release to seal the deal. In the end they added 2 new divisions for the new clan, as well as changed the last name to prevent unwanted memories. They would now be known as the Taka clan, with the 5 divisions being the Taijutsu division, the medical division, the assassination division which would train in stealth and archery, the tracking division, and the elites who were trained by each division. These groups would not train in only these things, but would make these skills their priority to learn. They would all be led by a person from the elite group chosen by each division head, since 5 members from each clan are put into the elite division, so there was a diversity. Kabuto sighed as he continued to move silently through the house. Right when he thought the negotiations were over, one crafty bastard had mentioned the new divisions, so that he could lead the tracking one, Ryu or something. Oh well, it hardly mattered now. Kabuto was finally at Hiashi's room and, not wasting any time, he kicked down the door and the branch members moved out. What is the meaning of this? Hiashi yelled out, standing up from where he was sitting with his family. He tried to activate the seal, but did not even get that far as his shoulders were hit with Jaiken strikes. He growled and abandoned that tactic to begin spinning. Kaiten. He yelled out as he rotated and conjured up a large blue sphere that knocked away the 3 branch members that surrounded him. Hiashi he heard to his right. He quickly looked to where his wife had been only to see his eldest knocked out and his wife in the hands of some teenager with a kunai at her neck. Liturgy Urk. He yelled as he was struck in the back by the remaining branch member. He could only watch helplessly as his wife's throat was split and a kunai raced towards him. Then all he saw was oblivion. Was that really necessary, Kabuto-san? The last branch member asked as he looked down in distaste at Konohayuga's unmoving body. Orochimaru-sama has already given you all plenty of leeway by allowing Hinata to live. Allowing anyone else of the main branch to is simply a liability. Now then, let's check on your comrades. I did not expect Hiashi to put up this much of a fight, Kabuto said with a sick smirk. He really enjoyed watching people suffer, it made him feel like he was in control, and nothing could be done against him. It was a shame that he couldn't kill that Hinata girl, but since she had been nothing but nice to the branch family and had never used a seal on any of them, they demanded that he let her live. Oh well, it would be interesting to see what she would do in the future. 2 of the other branch members were dead from head trauma, while the other had a broken arm thanks to their rather violent launch into the wall. Kabuto couldn't wait to get his hands on that Kaiten technique of his that would prove to be very valuable in the future anyway. Kabuto walked out of the room, his stress officially relieved, to begin the next phase of his plan. All of the techniques had already been secured, so now all that was left was the evacuation. Who knows, if he was lucky he might be able to cause even more pain with a laugh that chilled the other person in the room to the bone. The teenager exited the room to begin the next stage of the operation. As the 2 left, they both failed to notice the crying girl in the corner of the room, with her Byakugan active and a look that was so filled with hatred that it put any Uchiha's to shame. Orochimaru, the girl mumbled as that was the first thing she heard when she had woken up. Apparently Kabuto had made it to where she would awaken shortly after being knocked out, so she could see his handiwork sooner than later. I will do everything I can to kill him, Kabuto too. I will kill you all, she mumbled with hatred as she eventually fell to unconsciousness from both the emotional and physical strain. Jiraiya shivered as he looked down at the arena floor, seeing the 2 fighters who had finally entered the stadium. He had an extremely bad feeling, like something had happened that would weaken Konoha extremely. Oh well, it was probably nothing, besides he wanted to see how this next fight panned out. Would you like anything, Jiraiya-sama? A young man asked him as he held up a tray with a few items already on it for others. I'd like a soda please, he said with a grin as he gave the man some money to get him a drink. Little did anyone know that this was one of his many spies that would record information for him. Maybe he could find out if this village had anything to do with the bad feeling from earlier. Ken was very calm as he walked down to the arena with Naifu beside him. He knew the girl well, how could he not after being on the same squad as her for so long, and knew most of her tricks. Of course, this could be applied vice versa as his cousin knew many of his tricks as well. He couldn't let her think, that was obvious, so with a nod of his head, he decided that an immediate assault was his best bet. The 2 both looked up to Orochimaru, who just pointed a thumb over at Akuma with an amused face. With a serious look on his face, which was entirely negated by his childish body, he raised his arm and let it fall to let them know to begin. Without a single word spoken, Ken threw his arm out at Naifu as many iron senbon shot out from his open palm towards Naifu. She pulled out her new tantos in a flash and deflected all of them before smirking at her cousin. This was an act, she never showed emotion during a fight, she barely showed any in a normal day. She must be stalling for time. You shouldn't underestimate me, cousin, if you do I will defeat you with less effort than it took for Suka, she said smugly. She was trying to make Ken run out of chakra, then well the solution to that was simple. Fine, Ken said just as smugly, and an Naginata formed in the palm of his hand. He had trained Naifu in the tantos himself, and he knew that she was only a Chunin level with him. Add that to the better range of his Naginata, and this fight would be his. He charged forward point first towards Naifu, and she barely had time to dodge the strike with a leap to the right. This was what Ken wanted, however, as he slammed the shaft into her stomach, launching her across the arena. Unfortunately for him, she stood up a moment later and was able to negate most of the damage by a quick block with her tantos. Naifu hurriedly sheathed her tantos and began using hand seals. She didn't like using ninjutsu thanks to her low chakra reserves, but she was left with no choice. She could use both earth style and water style, but only knew a few jutsu for both. Unfortunately, this next jutsu would take out a quarter of her chakra reserves, but she had to act fast, and hesitance was not an option. She quickly went into a strange stance that only a few recognized as the stance for the hidden mist jutsu stance. Water style. Hidden mist jutsu. She yelled out as a thick mist began to fill the area. Ken frowned as the mist began to surround him and he couldn't see anywhere around him. Oh well, time to show another trick of his. He formed a large fan that was reminiscent to Madara's and reared back before swinging it all around him. This was successful as all of the mist faded away to reveal nothing. Ken sighed at this and deformed his Naginata and his Gunbai before forming hand seals for another technique. Before he could finish, he had to cover his arm in iron to deflect all of the shuriken thrown at him. He managed to block most of them, but one managed to catch him in the shoulder. He growled but chuckled as he absorbed the metal into his system, actually replenishing some of the chakra he lost. Naifu saw this and went back underground to try and think of a new strategy. However, before she could do so, Ken once again preformed his hand seals and slammed his hands on the ground. Iron style. Tracking iron serpents. He yelled as about 30 iron snakes went out from his palms into the ground. The way this jutsu worked was that Ken had to recognize the chakra of the other person in his system, in this case the chakra-coated shuriken that Naifu threw, and made iron snakes that could effortlessly move through the ground and track down the individual they were sent for. This was an A-rank jutsu and one of his strongest, which was seen when Naifu leapt out of the ground with 25 snakes after her. The problem was, he had to sacrifice defense with movement, so it only took one well-placed hit to destroy them. This was also seen when Naifu used her tantos to destroy most of them. The remaining snakes went back underground to await further instruction and would come back when he needed them to. I hate those snakes, Naifu gritted out through clenched teeth. They were the reason that she had lost most of their sparring match after all. Well, that's a shame, Ken said calmly as he faded into mud. What? Naifu asked intelligently before her eyes widened and she turned around to catch an iron-coated fist in the stomach. Before her eyes closed she smirked as a puff of smoke appeared and sizzling was heard. As the smoke faded, Ken saw a block of mud with many exploding tags on it. "Oh shy," Ken began to say before a large explosion engulfed his form. Naifu came out of the ground a moment later, while the area around Ken was covered with smoke. She had already used up half of her chakra in the fight and had to rip an iron snake off her forearm before preparing some shuriken to throw. Everyone in the stands were on the edge of their seats, except for Akuma, who asked his father to lift him up for a better view as they saw the smoke start to dissipate. In the middle of it was a man who was completely covered in iron, and many cheered at the fact that they got to see the famed black steel jutsu twice in one day. Ken, on the other hand, was pissed off. She could have killed him with that last attack if he wasn't so good with this jutsu. Ken decided it was time to end the fight and formed a few hand seals before charging at Naifu. Naifu recognized those hand seals and smirked before throwing her shuriken. Ken had planned to just deflect them but was surprised to see explosive seals on the insides of the shuriken. He quickly ducked and watched as the shuriken flew over his head and blew up with a loud bang. He face-planted before slowly getting up and forming different hand seals, much to Naifu's relief. The jutsu he was about to use was called the spinning iron drill, which had spikes all along it, as well as the normal drill that came out of his palm. It come out of his palm and surrounded the rest of his arm and was only usable in his black steel form. This was because it was so damaging that it would rip his arm off without the iron protecting it. No matter where a person was hit by it, they would face extreme damage, even a grazing blow, as the spike could elongate. In fact, if Naifu looked closely, she saw the iron on his right arm was a bit scraped from even starting the jutsu. She did not get much time to ponder this as Ken finished his hand seals and threw out both palms towards her. Iron style. Iron vortex. He yelled as two tips of iron began to come out of his palms. Soon they became two medium-sized drills that were completely iron and had small spikes on them. They both shot out at her at high speeds and began spinning. She managed to dodge the first one, but the second one grazed her side, grating into her skin and tearing away a small chunk of it. She cried out in pain and fell to one knee while glaring at her opponent. Damn it. She thought in anger and pain, temporarily throwing all her Kunoichi Compasser to the side. Fine, it's time for my strongest jutsu. Get ready, cousin, because you won't like this one bit. Naifu began to slowly stand up while Ken ran towards her. Ignoring this, she began the hand seals required for her final gamble. Throughout the battle she had been to the 5 corners necessary for this jutsu and had placed a seal in each one, now the entire arena was her territory. Sealing art. 5 trigram paralyzed seal. She yelled out as each of the 5 corners glowed blue before blue lightning came from them and wrapped themselves around Ken. Ken screamed in pain at this as iron was a conductor for electricity, so it was even worse for him to get caught in it. Naifu nodded and pulled out her tantos to prepare for a victory as Ken started to release his black steel jutsu. She charged forth and was about to hit Ken in the shoulder before her seal suddenly ended and she felt a large pain in her own shoulder. She slowly looked down to see an iron spike trailing from Ken's chest of all things right into her shoulder. How? She asked weakly as she was about to go unconscious from blood loss and pain. Ken simply pointed to one of the seals and her eyes widened when she saw that one of the iron snakes she hadn't killed had pierced it, ruining the seal. You almost had me, but I have seen this seal too many times to not have a plan for it. Now rest, it was a good fight and I have a feeling you will surpass me one day, but don't get cocky, that day is still far off, Ken said with one of his rare smiles. Naifu decided to reward it with a smile of her own and fell unconscious. It was nice to see her cousin a little happy again. As the medics carried Naifu off the field in a stretcher and helped Ken hobble to the medical bay as well for chakra loss, Akuma couldn't help but be amazed. He had no idea his sensei was that strong. Sure, he was a master with weapons, and he had heard of his black steel jutsu, but he was throwing jutsu Akuma had never heard of before like crazy. Father, you think I can ever learn those jutsu? Akuma asked excitedly while looking up at his father. Fukuku, I am afraid not, Akuma-kun, those jutsu can only be performed by a tetsu. You see, they have a kekai genkai that allows them to produce iron from their skin and use it in ways like that. You will never be able to do those jutsu, but you can always invent your own if you want to use some unique ones, Orochimaru told his son, while mentally thinking about making Ken an S-rank shinobi. He had shown exceptional skill in his battles and had been the one to invent most of those iron-style techniques. The only ones he hadn't invented were the Iron Senbon Jutsu and the Iron Vortex Jutsu, which were invented by the clan head. How did he get the Kekai Genkai? Akuma asked curiously. Well, that's simple, I gave it to him, Orochimaru said with a little bit of pride in his voice. That had been one of his most successful experiments ever, even after all the others he had done. Although there was one involving a potential plasma bloodline that he was currently working on that looked promising. All it did was amplify a fire affinity to a ridiculous degree, as well as modify the body to be able to handle it. If it worked, it would be one of his best ever, right on par with the Tetsu clan. Then why can't you give it to me? Akuma asked a little dejectedly. He was starting to think that maybe his father did not believe he could handle the power. Why else would he not let him have something that could give him more after all? He only wanted to make his father proud and wanted to use every tool at his disposal to do so. Orochimaru looked at his son and sighed. It seemed like the moment he had been avoiding was finally here. Akuma-kun, it is something that is very complex and many people actually find it inhumane, but it isn't. We are making people as strong as they can be, but to do so involves a lot of pain as well as death. However, they all know the price for this kind of strength and are willing to pay it. I don't want to tell you too much about it today, as I don't want to ruin the day for you. Instead, I will tell you all about it tomorrow and show you one of my more promising experiments, as they are called, tomorrow. Can you wait until then? Akuma slowly nodded, suddenly a little afraid about what he might see. Father and son both sat in awkward silence for a while until Orochimaru broke it. Well, come on. I know you want to go to that ramen stand again, so let's. At this, Akuma made a happy smile and began to talk excitedly about it among thanks. After seeing that smile, Orochimaru decided that maybe the village going bankrupt was a fair enough price to pay. Elsewhere, a man sat silently while looking over a reigning city. His plan was progressing nicely, all they needed were a few more members to join their ambition, as well as the locations of a few more things they were hunting. As he contemplated in silence, a strange creature that looked like a combination of a Venus flytrap and a human popped out of the ground. Half of it was a sickly white, while the other half was pitch black. Master, we have found the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi as you have asked, the black half of the creature said in a deep raspy voice. Yeah. And we also found 2 possible new members. One's a bit creepy, but he is very strong, and the other can actually turn into iron. He is loyal to his village though, so that's a bummer, the white side of the creature said in a bright light tone. The man they were talking to hummed before slowly opening his purple ringed eyes to look upon the city that he recently liberated. Good work, Zetsu, tell Sasori and Kisame they are to find the possible recruits and try to bring them to our side. Also, tell them not to give away too much and not to wear their cloaks, we don't want the villages to know about us just yet. As you wish, master. Bye. With that, the creature dubbed Zetsu disappeared once more into the floor for his new assignment, leaving the man to think once more. Soon, he thought. Soon, this world will know true pain, and there will finally be peace. He began to smile slowly, a rare sight for Nagato Uzumaki, otherwise known as Pain. I wonder if this is what you would have wanted, Yahiko. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow NIGHTANGEL52 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.